Please allow me to welcome our panelists. Our panel moderator, first and foremost, Nicola Golombek, founder of the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, Dylan Pillay, Executive Director and CEO of Temasek Holdings, Rania Al-Mashat, Egypt's Minister of Planning, Economic Development and International Cooperation, and Doug Peterson, Senior Advisor of S&P Global. Nicola, the floor is yours. Sorry, that was a bit quick. You had to run on stage there.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. Coming from South Africa, where we have one of the highest youth unemployment rates in the world, I have personally a tremendous sense of urgency for us to create as many jobs as we possibly can. And Ajay, in a recent piece in the Financial Times, drew attention to the fact that development is not just going to happen without the enabling conditions in place. And so we have a fantastic panel here today to guide us on how we're going to unlock these jobs, and as many of them as we possibly can. And Rania, I'm going to start with you. This is a kind of homecoming, having been an advisor to the chief economist at the IMF, now a minister in Egypt. Share with us your experience, your view on what are the foundational infrastructures that are required to drive a job creation agenda.
Thank you very much. And first, let me congratulate Ajay, President of the World Bank, and all the team here, bringing us back to the basics. Development is all about growth, is all about jobs, bringing everything that we're discussing in meetings back to the people. When we talk about infrastructure, I can think of economic infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and the human infrastructure. If it's the economic infrastructure, it's very important for governments to have macroeconomic stability, predictability with respect to policies, so that the private sector can strive. Because all of us know the government is not enough to generate jobs. The jobs have to be generated by firms, or people need to be able to create their own firms through entrepreneurial opportunities so that they can run businesses. So macroeconomic stability coupled with structural reforms that actually allow for dismantling barriers to entry, more competition. The green transition is very important. So continuing and sustaining macroeconomic stability through structural reform. So that's the first important infrastructure that policymakers need to have in mind. The second one is the physical infrastructure. If you want to have firms, if you want to have manufacturing hubs, clusters, you need to have the roads, the bridges, the connectivity, the grids for energy. You cannot have development, you cannot have private sector coming into a country if energy is not availed. And then third is the human infrastructure. And there comes equipping the youth with skills, with coping with all the new trends that are coming out, and how to tie this skill also with the needs of the private sector. In our case, there are many vocational schools which are tied to private sector in different industries. So again, if we're talking about infrastructure, I just want to say economic infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and then the human infrastructure.
Fantastic. Doug, I'm going to turn to you. You led S&P Global for over a decade. You know about the power of data to create transparency, to measure impact. What is the data and the signals that investors are looking for? When they look to deploying capital in emerging developing markets, how will they know whether these infrastructures exist?
Well, thank you for having me here. And following on what Rania just said about infrastructure, let me talk about financial infrastructure, market infrastructure. And as we know, there's capital, which is global, it's fungible, it can travel around the globe. And that capital, whether it's for a trader or a long-term capital strategic investor, it needs to have data. They need to have analytics to help them make an informed decision about where they're going to invest. And regulatory environment is probably one of the first places people stop to make a decision about where they're going to go next. And so you think about that regulatory infrastructure, there's pricing, there's price discovery, there's liquidity. You want to see how you can value securities or investments that are not liquid. You have the independent providers of opinions and information. You have the news, you have rating agencies, you have independent providers of equity research, and you have your auditors, so you have this independent views of organizations to provide these information to investors. And as part of that financial and regulatory infrastructure, I know sometimes this isn't the fun part of it, but it's so important that there's a way to have solvency or bankruptcy, that there's an orderly way for a company to fail. Failure can actually be quite good because failure allows you to move on, and the quicker you can do that, the better. So these are the types of things that our investors are looking at for that kind of financial infrastructure.
Really interesting. Rania, back to you. I mean, what we do also know is that investors really hate regulatory uncertainty. And so can you share some of the examples of governance frameworks you've put in place that have created success in Egypt to drive investment?
So let me maybe think of renewables, because it's not just about a green transition only. It's also about productivity, about skills, jobs. In our case, in 2014, our journey started with a very important change, which was the feed-in tariffs, allowing the private sector to be in that space. And since then, the amount of concessional finance that goes to the private sector, the different partnerships that have happened, the FDI that has come in, it's been the private-public partnership. So this is one very important structural reform that has actually allowed an open space for one of the most important sectors where we are blessed, but also are able to push green hydrogen now and actually push manufacturing as well.
Dylan, let me come to you. So we're talking about the importance of creating a vibrant, dynamic private sector. We're talking about countries in emerging and developing markets that have fiscal constraints, not enough private capital deployed, in many cases projects that are marginally bankable. How has Temasek been bridging that funding gap? What are the ways in which you have unlocked investment by doing that?
Well, thank you for that question. So I think the first thing I should say is that we at Temasek feel that we have three roles. As an investor, we should do well. As an institution, we should look forward and try to do right. And as a steward, we should try to do good. So it's really about bringing all these three things together in the wide range of activities that we have been undertaking. One of the things that we are very cognizant about is that in our neighborhood, there is a real issue about bankability and marginal bankability of projects, and in particular infrastructure projects. So if you think about what you need to do to scale capital, you need to have things in place like infrastructure. And infrastructure is not just hard infrastructure, it's not just economic infrastructure, but it's also social infrastructure. And you need to make sure those are in place in order to mobilize capital to where they should go to uplift communities in the neighborhood. And there's a simple reason why we believe that's the case, because for us to thrive as a company and for our country to thrive within our region, you've got to make sure that the whole region is able to thrive, because there's so much connectivity between all of us in one particular region. And that's the same whether you're in Africa, Middle East, the US, and elsewhere. Now, coming back to what we have been doing. So one of the things we've been trying to do is set up platforms over the years to sort of address a gap in the marketplace that could provide the financing for these objectives. And so we started financial inclusion back in 2004, 2005. More recently, we've been looking at energy transition. And that's a very simple issue, and it's linked to the energy trilemma. You have, on one hand, energy security, but in the emerging markets and developing economies, the more important things are energy affordability. So before you can even think about green energy, you have to address the issue of energy affordability. And what we realized for that is to get the solutions out into the marketplace, whether it's a transition to green energy, whether it's to develop green energy infrastructure, you need to put in place a financing structure that actually plugs the gap, that allows you to catalyze further funding to come in. And so we've set up an entity together with HSBC called Pentagreen, which was set up one objective in mind, to make marginally bankable projects in our region bankable. So roughly about 10% of green infrastructure projects in my part of the world is actually bankable. 35% is marginally bankable, and the rest is unbankable. The question is, how do we unlock that marginal bankability into bankability? And that means that's how you bring the senior lending in, and you bring down the cost of capital to allow for these projects to be not just bankable, but actually profitable, because you do want capital to find its way back into the marketplace. So you have to have a catalytic approach to this, and that's what we've been trying to do. We do a number of other things too. For example, we invest in things like food, water, waste, energy, materials, clean transportation, built environment, because it's all linked to our portfolio. We own an airline, so we have to figure out whether sustainable aviation fuel is something we should support. So there are many things we do, either because we think it's right for the region, so that we can actually thrive, or because it's right for our portfolio.
Okay, and now you and Doug are both part of the World Bank's Private Sector Investment Lab. Inspire us. Tell us some of the big ideas that are coming out of the lab that you think are going to be real dial movers.
Well, first, let me start and just say, what is the Private Sector Investment Lab? Ajay has a history of understanding the needs of the public sector and the private sector in this public-private partnership and how much power you can get from that. And there's a need globally for trillions of dollars of investments. And depending on what the source is, I could say it's 1.5 trillion, 4.2 trillion, $5 trillion a year for investments in infrastructure and social infrastructure. And so the Private Sector Investment Lab is a group of private sector companies who have come together with different projects to help try to fill that gap, to build capacity and build scale for financial capital to meet the needs of all of these different gaps. So let me talk quickly about one of the projects that I'm directly working with the World Bank team on, and that's what we call Originate to Distribute. When you think about a loan being made in the emerging markets, many times that loan is made, and it's a very long-term loan. It's been sitting with the World Bank for many years. And so we're looking at ways, how can you build the capacity for the World Bank to get velocity from its balance sheet by originating loans that can be distributed, that's the originate to distribute part, to private sector investors. So you can see that loan being turned over many times, and you're creating that capacity and that scale. So we're looking at what are some of the ways and the needs of the markets to have that origination to distribute, that standardization, things that the World Bank was working on, and now we can accelerate that work. It has to do with the distribution. What are the needs of the investors from the private sector for those long-term assets? Maybe they might need a guarantee. Maybe they need to see somebody that's taking a subordinated tranche. If there was a loss, maybe there's somebody else that will take the first loss before they take it. Can we think about structures of putting them in pools or warehousing them so somebody can get a distribution of a diversified pool? One of the goals of the Originate to Distribute is to create an asset class of infrastructure, because we're not the only ones looking at infrastructure investment. But if the World Bank, with their power to distribute, the relationships they have around the world, with the window they have on the needs, this is one of the best places in the world to start that change of thinking to create a new asset class of infrastructure.
Thank you. Dylan, do you want to?
I think it's an interesting exercise that Ajay is putting us through, because the World Bank Group has significant capabilities there, but the private sector has capabilities as well. It's really a question of how we bring our respective capabilities to work in the things which are seen as choke points, to mobilize capital, to mobilize tools available for what's out there for economic development. I will put that as how I see this lab working. And that means we have to come up with solutions together and see how they're workable in actual fact. Now, what I'm quite excited about is the mobilization of capital and the scalability of capital, and that capital has to be catalytic. So every dollar should be able to result in the raising of a multiplier of that, a multitude of that. And I think that's what the equity capital piece with the junior capital sleeve is important, especially when you think about marginal bankability, if you think about unbankability, if you think about energy transition in particular, because you need to bring the cost of capital down to where it becomes a commercial reality, not immediately, but over a period of time, so that it can be underwritable, that there is also frameworks in place to allow for the predictability of these instruments that we are trying to bring out into the marketplace. So that's actually gone much further than I would have expected it to. And the World Bank is itself looking at the availability of concessionary capital, just as we have made available concessionary capital as well. Because if you don't, it's difficult to actually bring in mezzanine capital, equity capital, senior bank financing into the projects where you need to get things going. So that's one element. The second thing, of course, is that whenever we invest in emerging markets and developing economies, one of the biggest risks you take is foreign exchange volatility. And so therefore, it's very important to see how we can negate that as much as possible. The World Bank has certain tools. The private sector has been thinking about how to use those tools. And so therefore, things like local currency mobilization facilities are critical to that, because then you provide an opportunity where local institutions can have the backing in order to do what we call credit enhancement wraps to ensure bankability and a predictable set of returns to investors who are prepared to invest in those countries. And they actually eventually lead to the very same instruments which will get securitized by Doug's stream. So it's actually quite hand in glove, some of the solutions that we've come up with. So these are just some of them which have come about. I don't want to go through the list of it because I think we won't have enough time. But what I'm really, I think, pleasantly surprised is the progress that we've made over the last 1.5 years since I've been on it. And I think it's because we've all decided that this is worthwhile doing. None of us are letting ourselves off the hook. We all have something to offer. If we don't do it now, when are we ever going to do it? It's like the coalition of the willing, hopefully.
Okay, that is going to be the theme of the day, coalition of the willing. But a piece of the puzzle we haven't mentioned, Rania, which perhaps we can return to you on, is just the complementary role of domestic capital mobilization and the role that it plays in driving these solutions. Perhaps you can reflect on that.
Well, first, it's very timely what's happening, because if we're thinking about countries today wanting to increase their productivity and create the jobs, the private sector needs to find the financing, and it needs to find the financing at a competitive rate, given the increased risks that are taking place. So I think it cannot be a better moment to actually bring many of these initiatives forward so that private sector can benefit from these windows. This is also happening at a time when concessional windows in general are sort of coming under pressure. For any country, an integrated financing framework is important. So the FDI side, the domestic resource mobilization, debt swaps if they are available, guarantees which are being discussed. But as you mentioned, domestic resource mobilization is also linked to what you do on your capital market. So some of these tools for countries to benefit from need to also deepen their capital markets. And just looking at the partnership we have with the World Bank and IFC and MIGA and many other institutions, a lot of the work we do is not just on financing, but it's also on policy. And this policy dialogue has been very, very important and critical in helping us, take recommendations into action, operationalize many of the successful examples that happened elsewhere in our countries, so that we are able to be ready, if you will, to endorse these initiatives. Because if the market is not ready, if the government is not ready, you miss an opportunity. So this is another aspect today as well. The speed by which governments need to act fast is much needed, more than any time before.
Okay, so we have a coalition of the willing, we have the frameworks we need, we have a sense of urgency, and let's talk about where we should focus our effort if we're looking to create the most jobs we can. The World Bank has identified 5 sectors that it believes have the greatest potential to unlock jobs, and those include energy and infrastructure, agribusiness, healthcare, tourism, and manufacturing. So I'm going to give you, Dilhan, the first bite to say which of these excites you the most, why. Feel free to disagree with each other or agree with each other, preferably robustly. But please tell us, what excites you most as the zone of opportunity for us to act swiftly, effectively, and where we can get the biggest bang for buck.
I think I'd like to start by saying all 5 excite me. Okay, I tell you why, because these 5 areas are absolutely necessary to address, not just by a single country, but actually globally. And there is a reliance that all of us have on these sectors, even if we're not directly involved in it. I'm talking about as an individual country. So, but I'm going to take one which my country doesn't have as a sector, which is agri-food. Okay, because we import largely all our food into Singapore. We're only 730 square kilometers, so it's not much land for us to till for our own food. But we have farmers there too. And I think that the reason that we have to be mindful of the fact that today in the agricultural sector, the farmer takes the biggest risk of it all, especially the smallholder farmers. And that we have this issue of wastage at production because they don't have the right tools available in order to ameliorate the effects of that. So their own harvests are also to some extent impacted by what they have in terms of their own infrastructure, their own tools to generate as much income and yield as they can. On the other hand, on the consumption level in the developed markets, there's so much of wastage. So I think we need to figure out how we can address the issues in agri, both from the perspective of ensuring that smallholder farmers and those involved in the agricultural sector have the opportunity of de-risking themselves in the context of the harvest, in the context of climate change and all the other issues that come about, to also use sustainable farming practices, using better seeds so you can get better productivity, better yield, using data in order to ensure that you have the right information as you grow your crops, as you decide to put it through the supply chain, to ensure that data is there for transparency so that there's pricing transparency for the farmers as they go through the supply chain. And I think that even more importantly is the issue of ensuring that there's financing for them. We own a drip irrigation company. And as you know, one of the important features of drip irrigation is water resource management. And so much of water is used in the context of agriculture. 70% of fresh water is used in agriculture. And water is a precious resource. But the reality is the cost of installing the equipment is not a low one for the smallholder farmers. And so if you can bring the combination of the equipment, data analytics, and therefore the ability to bring financing solutions to the farmer to take it, and then add to that microinsurance for the farmers as well to protect themselves against the harvest and the consequences of the harvest. You've got better outcome for the farmers. And if you've got better outcome for farmers, you've got better outcome for global food security. And that means for all of us who sit in the comfort of our own economies when we need to rely so much on the EMDEs for that.
Fantastic. Certainly coming from an African context, livelihoods in agriculture is certainly one of our biggest opportunities. Rania, let me give you the second bite at the cherry.
Well, I think I agree that the 5 sectors are not mutually exclusive. And if we think of global public goods, any country doing their own thing, I'm sure contributes to the outcome. But being from Egypt and being a former minister of tourism, I would say that when you take a look at the statistics around the tourism sector, there's an employment multiplier 1 to 4. Every direct job in tourism generates 4 indirect jobs. So that is a sector which, if we're thinking about peace in the world, mobility, creating openness, I think tourism is one sector that, and also when you take a look at the statistics, it's everybody's talking about exports of services. This is an export, productivity gains. You need to have good infrastructure for tourism. So it's hotels, it's construction material, hospitality. It's a lot of things related to that sector, and there's a gender element as well when we talk about tourism. And I cannot be from Egypt and not advertise that our Grand Egyptian Museum is going to open on July 3rd. So there's plenty of opportunity for tourism there. But honestly, it is but there, of course, the sector itself has lots of vulnerabilities given any risks that are related to it. But investing in tourism is really investing in people, skills, and the value chain across is quite significant.
Fantastic. I don't want to be competing with you for tourists, but I do know that in South Africa, for every 12 visitors to the country, a job is created. And that's an incredibly direct correlation. Doug, over to you.
Well, I'm the same. I believe all five are very interrelated. But let me give a long answer about infrastructure and why I think infrastructure and energy infrastructure, especially energy transition infrastructure, is so important. But the long way I'm going to get there is just for 1 second to go back to the question earlier about domestic capital markets. One of the values of developing domestic capital markets is when you go from banking to fiduciary, which creates savings, you go from the banking market to the insurance market to the pension market. As you go through that transition, you start building institutional investors that have a very long-term view, and it starts developing that domestic capital you need for infrastructure investment. Infrastructure investment, like you talked about, has a multiplier effect. For every dollar that you spend on infrastructure, you get another $1.4 to $1.6 of additional investment. Just think about what happens when you build an airport. When you build an airport, you get hotels, you get rental cars, you get stations to refuel or to recharge your vehicle. You build a bridge, you get businesses on both sides of the bridge. You also, in many types of infrastructure, things like bridges, you actually also reduce your carbon footprint because people might have been driving very long ways around and now they can get to and from something much quicker. Same happens with rail and light rail. So I think infrastructure is one of those enablers that allows you to have the tourism, it allows you to have the manufacturing. If you put a manufacturing plant somewhere, you don't have the roads and the rail and the ports to export it or to deliver it, you have a problem. So infrastructure for me is going to be such a critical part of any development plan of any country. And along with that, as you know me, being a financial guy, I think the financial markets also needs to go along with that.
But if I just may add to what Doug said, I think digital infrastructure is so critical. It will actually enable many new businesses to be created. It will also allow for people to be plugged in as entrepreneurs, even small entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs and the like, and that will create much more opportunity than we would see otherwise.
I couldn't agree more. I sense the excitement, I sense the opportunity. I wholeheartedly agree that the young people especially need that digital infrastructure so that they can participate as quickly as possible in this economy. I think we have the marching orders, we have the blueprints. I just hope that we can take this moment from this panel, turn it into a movement, and really get our act together quickly, effectively, and together. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.